Charlie was once a shy bobcat kid who ran from everyone in the yard, hiding among the bushes and under the porch, until the day he met Boriana, and slowly, the fear faded. Charlie grew more confident, lingering longer each visit and eventually taking food straight from her hand. He learned her footsteps and came running when he heard her. Yet he still retreated from other family members, clearly recognizing and preferring her. But just as their fragile bond began to bloom, a second bobcat showed up, bold, fearless, and clearly ready to steal both snacks and attention from Charlie's favorite human. Watch what happens when a bobcat becomes not only the most obedient wild cat, but also the most jealous one. Before we start, hit the like button and make sure to subscribe if you haven't, and hit that notification bell so that you won't miss any new stories. The morning sun poured like warm honey across the sprawling backyard of the Peterson property in rural Tennessee, painting everything in shades of gold and amber. Boriana Peterson stood at her kitchen window, coffee mug in hand, watching the mist rise from the meadow that bordered their 3-acre homestead. At 62 years old, she had learned to appreciate these quiet moments before the day truly began. Before her husband Robert started complaining about his back, before the chickens needed feeding, and before whatever chaos the universe had planned decided to announce itself. She had no idea that chaos was already watching her from behind the azalea bushes. It was mid-April when Boriana first noticed the tiny ears. They were tufted at the tips, poking up between the dense foliage like two furry periscopes surveying enemy territory. She squinted, setting down her mug. The ears disappeared. She picked up her mug. The ears reappeared. "Robert," she called softly over her shoulder. "Either I'm losing my marbles, or there's something in the azaleas playing peekaboo with me." Her husband shuffled into the kitchen, still in his bathrobe and looking like a man who had lost a wrestling match with his pillow. "Probably that darn raccoon again. I told you we should have—" "It's not the raccoon," Boriana interrupted. "The ears are pointed and tufted." Robert joined her at the window, and together they watched as a small, spotted face emerged from between the branches. Wide golden eyes blinked at them with an expression that seemed to say, "I have made a terrible mistake." "Well, I'll be," Robert breathed. "That's a bobcat, Kit." The tiny creature, no bigger than a large house cat, stared at them for approximately 2 more seconds before executing what could only be described as a full-body panic. It launched itself backward, tumbled over its own oversized paws, bounced off a garden gnome named Gerald, and disappeared under the back porch with the speed of a furry cannonball. Boriana and Robert exchanged glances. "Did that bobcat just knock over Gerald?" Robert asked. "Gerald has survived 3 hurricanes and my sister's parallel parking," Boriana replied. "He'll be fine." Over the next few weeks, the bobcat Kit became a regular presence on the Peterson property, though presence was perhaps too strong a word for a creature that spent most of its time being invisible. Boriana spotted him in glimpses, a flash of spotted fur disappearing around the tool shed, a suspicious rustling in the tomato plants, a pair of accusing eyes glowing from beneath the front steps when she retrieved the morning newspaper. She named him Charlie, though she had no idea if Charlie was a boy or a girl, and frankly, at this point, she wasn't about to get close enough to check. "You know you can't keep feeding a wild bobcat," Robert said one morning, watching his wife set out a small dish of chicken scraps near the back porch. "I'm not feeding him," Boriana replied primly. "I'm leaving food in my own backyard. If a wild bobcat happens to find it, that's between him and God." Robert opened his mouth, closed it, and wisely decided to go check on the chickens instead. The chicken scraps disappeared, as they did every day. But Charlie remained steadfastly terrified of human contact. Whenever Boreana stepped outside, he vanished like a spotted ghost. When Robert walked to his workshop, Charlie somehow teleported to the opposite end of the property. Even their neighbors, the Hendersons, reported seeing that weird little cat sprint across their lawn as if being chased by demons whenever anyone came within 50 feet. "He's the most dramatic animal I've ever seen," Margaret Henderson told Boreana over the fence one afternoon. "Yesterday, he saw my husband carrying a garden hose and practically levitated into that oak tree. Stayed up there for 3 hours. He's not dramatic," Boreana defended. "He's cautious." "Cautious? Boreana, honey, I've seen less panic in a turkey on Thanksgiving." The breakthrough happened on a Tuesday in late May. Boreana was sitting on the back porch, enjoying the afternoon sunshine and reading a mystery novel that she'd already guessed the ending to by page 40. She wasn't paying attention to anything in particular. Wasn't looking for Charlie, wasn't making any deliberate movements, wasn't doing anything except existing quietly in the golden afternoon light. And then she felt it. A presence. She looked up slowly, turning her head with the careful deliberation of someone who has learned that sudden movements cause small bobcats to achieve orbit. And there, approximately 6 feet away, was Charlie. He wasn't hiding. He wasn't preparing to flee. He was simply sitting there, watching her. "Well, hello," Boreana said softly. "This is new." Charlie's ears twitched. His tail, stubby and adorable, gave a little flick, but he didn't run. They sat together in silence for nearly 10 minutes. Boreana didn't move. She barely breathed. And when she finally, slowly, reached for a piece of dried chicken from the bag she always kept nearby these days, Charlie's eyes tracked her movement with an intensity that suggested he was calculating 17 different escape routes while simultaneously considering whether chicken was worth the risk. She tossed the treat gently, letting it land about 3 feet in front of him. Charlie approached the treat the way a bomb squad approaches a suspicious package. He circled it. He sniffed it from multiple angles. He looked at Boreana as if to confirm this wasn't some elaborate trap. Then, finally, he ate it. And he didn't run away afterward. "Would you look at that?" Boreana whispered to herself, feeling something warm bloom in her chest. "We're making progress." Progress, as it turned out, had a very specific definition where Charlie was concerned. By June, he would approach within 3 feet of Boreana, but only Boreana. When Robert stepped onto the porch, Charlie evaporated. When the mail carrier came up the drive, Charlie became one with the shrubbery. When the Hendersons' grandson visited and ran screaming through the yard playing some game involving imaginary dinosaurs, Charlie achieved a land speed record getting to the safety of the old barn. But with Boreana, something remarkable was happening. He learned her footsteps. "Watch this," she told Robert one afternoon, positioning him at the kitchen window. She walked across the back porch, her sneakers making their distinctive squeak-thump pattern on the wooden boards. Within 30 seconds, a spotted face emerged from behind the tool shed. Charlie trotted across the yard, actually trotted like a happy puppy, and sat himself down at the base of the porch steps, looking up at Boreana with an expression of eager anticipation. "That's the same bobcat that once hid in a tree for 3 hours?" Robert asked incredulously. "The very same. The one that knocked over Gerald?" "Gerald has forgiven him." By July, Charlie was taking food directly from Boreana's hand. The first time it happened, she cried. Just a little. She would later blame allergies when Robert asked about her red eyes, but they both knew the truth. There was something profound about earning the trust of a wild creature, something that felt like a gift. Charlie's whiskers would tickle her palm as he delicately took the treat. His golden eyes would meet hers, and in those moments, Boreana felt a connection that transcended the boundaries between species. This tiny wild cat, who had spent months being terrified of everything with a pulse, had chosen her. "You're special, Charlie," she would tell him, and his stubby tail would flick as if he agreed completely. August brought two significant developments to the Peterson household. The first was that their air conditioning broke during the hottest week of the summer, leading to Robert's ongoing series of complaints that could be heard approximately 3 counties away. The second was Buddy. He appeared without warning on a Monday morning, another Bobcat kit, slightly smaller than Charlie, with markings that were more gray than brown, and an attitude that suggested he had never experienced fear in his entire short life. Buddy waltzed onto the property like he owned it. He strutted past the azaleas without a glance, ignored Gerald the garden gnome entirely, and marched right up to the back porch where Boreana was sitting with Charlie. Charlie, for his part, looked like he had just witnessed a personal betrayal on a cosmic scale. "Oh my," Boreana said, staring at the newcomer. "And who might you be?" Buddy meowed. Actually meowed, like a house cat. Then he sat down approximately 2 inches from Charlie and fixed Boreana with an expectant stare. Charlie's tail puffed up to 3 times its normal size. Now, Boreana said, reaching for her bag of treats. "There's plenty for everyone." What happened next would become family legend. Boreana, operating on the reasonable assumption that the newer, smaller kit should probably be shown that food was available, tossed a treat to Buddy first. Charlie froze. Not in a scared way, not in a preparing to flee way, in a way that suggested he had just been stabbed through the heart and was processing his imminent death. His golden eyes went wide. His mouth dropped open slightly. He stared at Buddy, then at Boreana, then at the treat, then at Boreana again, with an expression of such profound emotional devastation that Boreana actually laughed out loud. "Oh, Charlie," she said, quickly tossing him a treat. "Don't be jealous, sweetheart. There's enough love and chicken for everyone." But Charlie was having none of it. He snatched his treat, turned his back on Buddy, and sat with his stubby tail twitching in what could only be described as indignant fury. He refused to look at Boreana for the rest of the afternoon. "Are you sulking?" she asked him at one point. Charlie's ear rotated toward her voice, but he did not turn around. He was clearly, deliberately, pointedly sulking. Robert, watching from the kitchen window, was laughing so hard he had to sit down. The rivalry between Charlie and Buddy became the Peterson household's primary source of entertainment for the rest of the summer. Buddy, as it turned out, had absolutely no sense of boundaries or appropriate Bobcat behavior. He would flop down wherever he pleased, including directly in Charlie's favorite spots. He would approach Boreana with the casual confidence of a cat who had never been told no in his life. He would steal treats, interrupt tender moments, and generally behave like the annoying little brother Charlie had never wanted and absolutely did not ask for. And Charlie's reactions were glorious. When Buddy got a treat first, Charlie would freeze in his tracks and perform what the Petersons came to call the wounded stare, a look of such theatrical betrayal that it could have won awards on Broadway. When Buddy sat in Charlie's preferred spot near the azaleas, Charlie would pace back and forth just out of range, his stubby tail lashing, clearly working through some very big feelings. When Buddy managed to get Boreana's attention first, Charlie would sit at a medium distance and project an aura of sadness so profound that it seemed to lower the temperature of the surrounding air. "He's not even hungry," Boriana told her friend Margaret one afternoon as they watched the drama unfold. "Look, I just offered him a treat and he ignored it completely. He's just upset that Buddy exists." And it was true. Charlie had begun ignoring food entirely when Buddy was around. He would sit at the edge of the yard, watching Boriana with those soulful golden eyes, seemingly content just to be in her presence, until Buddy showed up and ruined everything. "You know what I think?" Margaret said, sipping her iced tea. "I think that Bobcat loves you, like actually loves you, and he's jealous." "He's a wild animal," Boriana protested weakly. "Boriana, honey, I've been married 43 years. I know jealousy when I see it. That Bobcat is jealous." The moment that changed everything happened on a quiet September evening. Boriana had been sitting on the porch with both bobcats, well, near both bobcats. Buddy was sprawled at her feet, having completely abandoned any pretense of being a wild animal. And Charlie was sitting at his usual medium distance, radiating complicated emotions. The sunset was painting the sky in shades of pink and gold, and Boriana felt a sudden urge to capture the moment. She pulled out her phone, positioned it to record, and then realized she'd left her reading glasses inside. "I'll be right back," she told the bobcats, as if they understood. "Don't do anything interesting while I'm gone." She propped the phone against a flower pot still recording and went inside. What the camera captured next became Boriana's most treasured possession. For a long moment after she left, nothing happened. Buddy stretched out and started grooming himself, completely uninterested in anything except his own magnificent fur. Charlie sat where he always sat, watching the back door. Then, slowly, he began to move. He approached the porch with none of his usual caution. There was no scanning for threats, no calculating escape routes, no visible signs of his characteristic anxiety. He simply walked forward, his stubby tail relaxed, his ears perked with something that looked almost like hope. He passed Buddy without sparing him a glance. He climbed the porch steps, something he had never done before, and he sat down directly next to Boriana's phone, in the exact spot where Boriana herself had been sitting moments before. There was food on the porch, treats that Boriana had left out, still within easy reach. Charlie didn't touch them. He just sat there, waiting. The camera captured 5 minutes of this. 5 minutes of a wild bobcat sitting perfectly still, patient and calm, in the space his favorite human had occupied. Occasionally, his ears would swivel toward the back door. Occasionally, his tail would give a hopeful little flick. He wasn't hungry. He didn't want treats. He wanted her. When Boriana returned with her glasses and saw Charlie sitting on the porch, she stopped dead in her tracks. Her hand flew to her mouth. "Oh, Charlie," she whispered. Charlie looked up at her, and his stubby tail wagged, actually wagged, and he chirped a small sound that was nothing like the meow of a house cat and everything like a greeting between friends. Boriana sat down beside him, moving slowly, giving him every opportunity to flee if he wanted to. He didn't want to. He stayed exactly where he was, close enough that his spotted fur brushed against her arm. They sat together in the fading light, woman and wild bobcat, sharing something that needed no words to explain. The treats lay forgotten at their feet. Buddy eventually wandered off to investigate something fascinating in the garden. The evening chorus of crickets began their symphony. And in that moment, Boriana understood something that changed everything she thought she knew about wild animals. Love didn't require domestication. Trust didn't require captivity. Connection didn't require a shared language or even a shared species. Sometimes love was just choosing to sit beside someone. Sometimes trust was just staying when you could run. And sometimes, the most profound connections came from the most unexpected places, like a tiny, spotted bobcat kid who had once been afraid of everything and everyone, until he found the one person worth being brave for. The seasons changed, as they always do. Charlie grew from a kit into a young adult bobcat, his spots fading slightly, his frame filling out with muscle and wildness. He ranged further now, sometimes disappearing for days to do whatever it was that bobcats did in the Tennessee wilderness. But he always came back. He would appear at the edge of the yard, sitting in the golden afternoon sunlight, waiting for the sound of Boriana's footsteps on the back porch. He would trot toward her, still with that happy, puppy-like energy that had never quite faded, and accept her offerings of dried chicken with the delicate precision of a gentleman. And sometimes, when the light was just right and the evening was warm, he would climb those porch steps and sit beside her. Not for food, not for treats. Just for her. Buddy still visited too, though less frequently. He had grown into a magnificent creature, bold and fearless, and he seemed to understand that Charlie's bond with Boriana was something special, something he couldn't compete with and perhaps didn't want to. The jealousy eventually softened into something like acceptance. Charlie learned to tolerate Buddy's presence without the theatrical wounded stares, though he still maintained a vigilant awareness of treat distribution that bordered on obsessive. "You're still keeping count, aren't you?" Boriana would ask him, and Charlie's ear would twitch in a way that confirmed he absolutely was. Margaret Henderson declared the whole situation the most ridiculous and beautiful thing she had ever witnessed, and regularly invited herself over just to watch the bobcat drama unfold. Robert, for his part, had developed a grudging respect for Charlie, though he was still slightly bitter about Gerald, who had required repositioning after the incident and now faced a slightly different direction than before. The final piece of the story came on a morning in early December. Boriana had been feeling under the weather. Nothing serious, just the kind of winter cold that made everything feel foggy and slow. She had barely left the house in 3 days, and when she finally emerged onto the back porch, wrapped in blankets and clutching a cup of chamomile tea, she felt a profound sense of guilt. Charlie must have thought she abandoned him, but before she could even settle into her chair, she heard it. A chirp, then another, then a sound that was almost like a worried trill. Charlie emerged from behind the azaleas at a pace that could only be described as urgent. He crossed the yard in what seemed like 3 bounds, ignoring every cautious instinct that usually governed his movements. He leaped onto the porch, something he almost never did when others might be watching, and stopped directly in front of Boriana. And then he did something he had never, ever done before. He bumped his head against her hand. It was a small gesture, gentle and quick, lasting maybe half a second. But it was unmistakable. It was the kind of gesture a house cat might make to greet a beloved owner. It was an act of affection. From a wild bobcat. Boriana's tea went cold in her forgotten hand. Tears streamed down her face. Actual tears, not the allergies variety. And Charlie sat beside her, his golden eyes soft, his stubby tail wrapped around his paws, looking for all the world like a creature who had spent the past 3 days worried sick and was now overwhelmed with relief. "I'm okay," Boriana whispered to him. "I'm here. I'm not going anywhere." Charlie's ear twitched, his tail flicked, and he settled in beside her, close enough to touch, content to simply exist in her presence. Some stories don't have dramatic endings. Some stories are simply about the quiet, profound connections that make life meaningful. The Peterson household continued much as it always had, with one notable addition: a wild bobcat who was not really theirs, who belonged to no one and everyone, and perhaps especially to himself, but who had chosen to love a 62-year-old woman in Tennessee with all the complicated, jealous, loyal devotion of his wild heart. Charlie still hated when Buddy got treats first. He still performed the wounded stare with theatrical precision whenever he felt slighted. He still vanished like smoke whenever anyone except Boreanaz tried to approach him. But on golden afternoons, when the light was warm and the world was quiet, he would sit on that back porch and wait for the sound of her footsteps. And when she appeared, his stubby tail would wag, and he would chirp his greeting, and he would sit beside her for hours, not eating, not wanting anything except her presence. Because that was the truth at the heart of this story, the truth that Boreanaz's phone had captured on that September evening, and that she understood in her soul. What Charlie wanted most wasn't a treat at all. It was simple companionship. It was love. And even a tiny wild bobcat, especially a tiny wild bobcat, could teach us all something about what it means to choose someone, to trust someone, to brave your fears for someone who makes the world feel a little less scary. The sun set over the Peterson property, painting the sky in shades of amber and rose. Boreanaz sat on her porch, Charlie at her side, the evening chorus of crickets singing their ancient songs. Somewhere in the distance, Buddy was probably doing something ridiculous. Gerald the garden gnome watched over them all with his perpetual ceramic smile. And in that moment, everything was exactly as it should be.